The running back position, like all positions in football, is constantly evolving. At one point, the most important position on the field was the running back. At others, it's been a position of afterthought, basically utilized as either an extra pass catcher or pass blocker with occasional halfback draws or inner red zone work. With this in mind, comparing running backs throughout the ages can be a lot like comparing apples and oranges. But we did our best to rank the top 10 running backs of all time based on dominance in their era, overall stats, and value to the team. At number 10, we have Marshall Faulk, the unquestioned greatest receiving running back in the history of the sport. Marshall doesn't only have the record for both receptions and receiving yards for a running back, but he is also 8th in all-time rushing touchdowns and 12th in all-time rushing yards. A 6-time All-Pro who is in 2 different rings of honor, Marshall won the 2000 NFL MVP and was perhaps the greatest player on arguably the greatest offense of all time, the greatest show on turf. And keep in mind, he's just our number 10. Now you're probably thinking, how is the all-time leading rusher in both yards and touchdowns, and a 3-time Super Bowl champion as one of, if not the best players on the team, all the way down at number 9 in Emmitt Smith? Not to mention, Emmitt also won the 1990 Rookie of the Year, the 1993 NFL MVP, the Super Bowl MVP for that same season, and was on the first team All-1990s Decade Team. It's not like Emmitt never caught the ball either, as he had over 500 catches in his career. This insanely great resume puts him on this insanely elite list. However, he cannot be higher up than he is, and here's why. 123 other men have had more yards per carry than Emmitt's 4.2. But perhaps even more strikingly, he averaged less than 4 yards per carry 6 different seasons in his career. Most of which were the only times in his career where he didn't have the Great Wall of Dallas in front of him, the greatest offensive line in the history of football. Between his offensive linemen, fullbacks, and tight ends, Emmitt had 8 different blockers who had Pro Bowl seasons while he was there, combining for a total of 29 Pro Bowl seasons while they were blocking for Emmitt. On top of this, Emmitt had other beneficiaries of this offensive line around him, who also made the Hall of Fame in Troy Aikman and Michael Irvin, clearing more defenders out of the box and giving Emmitt more room to run. And the Cowboy defense wasn't too shabby either, helping the Cowboys generally keep the lead once they had it, and thus increasing the amount of rushes to burn the clock. One slot ahead of Emmitt, we have Gale Sayers, the Kansas Comet, who was a 5-time first-team All-Pro, starter on the 1960s NFL All-Decade Team, and included on the 50th, 75th, and 100th NFL anniversary teams. Averaging 5 yards a carry, a big word used for Gale is if, which is if he didn't destroy his knee at just 26 years old, all but ending his career, Gale would be known for more than just being in Brian's song. I really tried not to factor in off-the-field behavior onto my list, which was especially tough for this creep, Adrian Peterson. In a completely pass-happy era, Adrian is the sole representative on our list whose peak was in the 2010s, ending up 4th in all-time rushing touchdowns and 5th in all-time rushing yards. The 7-time All-Pro once rushed for an NFL record of 296 yards in a game, and won the 2012 NFL MVP a mere months after tearing his MCL and ACL. Tony Dorsett almost single-handedly kept the Dallas Cowboys relevant in the early half of the 1980s, rushing for over 1,000 yards 8 different times with minimal talent around him. In contrast to Emmitt's 29 Pro Bowl appearance seasons for those blocking him, Tony had just 11. The Heisman winner played just as well in the pros as he did in his legendary high school and college careers in Western Pennsylvania. And in the words of Cowboy legend Charlie Waters, was the missing piece on the 1977 Super Bowl champion Cowboys, where Tony was perhaps the best player on the team, even as a rookie. He was the most productive player outside of Randy White on a team that went to 5 out of 6 consecutive conference championship games, which no other running back on this list can come close to saying, and he retired 2nd all-time in rushing yards. The best running back I myself have ever seen has the NFL record for most touchdowns in a season, most points scored in a season, and most consecutive games with a touchdown at 18 games. LaDainian Tomlinson was first team All-2000s after having been a 6-time All-Pro. The 2006 NFL MVP is currently 2nd all-time in rushing touchdowns, was a rare bright spot in the history of the San Diego Chargers, and even threw for 7 touchdowns. Remember that morality thing I tried not to factor in? Well, objectively speaking, maybe the greatest running back ever at his peak was none other than the Juice. O.J. Simpson followed up a Heisman Trophy and first overall pick selection with an even greater pro career, setting the NFL record for rushing yards per game in a single season at 143.1 rushing yards a game in his 1973 MVP season. On an absolutely horrific Buffalo Bills team that pounded the Juice into oblivion, O.J. led the NFL in rushing yards 4 out of 5 years in the mid-70s, and received more votes than any other position player to the 70s All-Decade team. Perhaps the most electrifying player in the history of football, Barry Sanders was also the most successful Heisman winner at any position as a pro. An All-Pro and Pro Bowler literally every single year of his career. The 1997 NFL MVP, who by the way still has the single-season rushing yards and rushing touchdowns record in college, once rushed for over 100 yards 14 straight games in the pros. Barry is also the only man to have more than 1,500 yards rushing in 5 different seasons, and somehow dragged the hapless Lions to the playoffs 5 times in the 90s, earning him first team All-Decade. The top 2 are interchangeable and nearly impossible to distinguish, but given how impossibly good Barry's career was, they needed to be to get this far. Sweetness possessed the greatest and most accurate nickname in the history of football, and in every way exemplified the very best, not just of football, not just of sports, but the United States in general. Walters still holds the record for consecutive running back starts at 187 straight games from 1975 to 1987. The 1977 NFL MVP had more than 1,200 yards rushing a shocking 10 times, and retired with the most rushing yards and rushing touchdowns up to that point. Yet another pathetic franchise that was and is the Chicago Bears, Sweetness was the main cog in providing the Bears with their first and only Super Bowl in 1985. 2 major awards are named after him, and lived by providing one of the most incredible examples in sports history. Now, for our number 1 spot, who other than maybe Tom Brady is the most impactful player in the history of football, the one and only Jim Brown. Before retiring in the prime of his career to become a movie star, Jim won 3 MVPs, an NFL championship, and was an All-Pro every single year of his career. 8 times he led in rushing yards, 5 times in rushing touchdowns, and he still holds the NFL record for most career yards per game at 104.3 yards per game. Perhaps the greatest athlete in human history, Jim set the all-time Long Island record at my cousin's alma mater of Manhasset High School for basketball points per game at 38, before playing for the Syracuse Orange in basketball. Arguably the greatest lacrosse player in the sport's history, rules literally were changed as a result of Jim's dominance, resulting in the requirement of cradling the ball instead of being able to hold it directly close to your body like Jim did. Jim finished in the top 5 of the National Decathlete Championships while at Syracuse, and he also happened to play football. We'll go over in a future video the greatest athletes in American sports history, but spoiler alert, Jim should be in any top 5. Now I know there are a lot of names that shockingly are not in the top 10, so here are just a few of our honorable mentions. Like, comment, and subscribe for more videos to come.